Hi, good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be. I am Jade, and I'm going to be discussing Chapter 2, Communication Options and Conflict, from our book, Managing Conflict Through Communication. And this chapter focuses on issues concerning functional and dysfunctional cycles. And they offer options that can either be helpful or hurtful depending on the type of behaviors or the way we're engaging conflict. So, what are intangible conflict issues? Those would involve immaterial resources that we value, such as love, respect, self-esteem, power, cooperation, attention, and caring. You might see these in situations like a partner not paying enough attention to another partner, a partner using offensive language such as racist, sexist, stereotyping type of language. One person's behaviors, habits, or actions that annoy or upset the other. One partner needing alone time or time away from friends. And what all these examples have in common is that they involve non-material issues like personality, relationship, or behavioral issues. And we could see that in a relationship or our friendships, that our actions have consequences, whether those are good or bad. The good news is that we have the ability to make choices in conflict and take responsibility and be accountable for our actions when looking for resolution. By identifying patterns in our interactions, both functional and dysfunctional, we are able to better manage our conflicts in a more productive way. So dysfunctional conflict cycles, those would be, that would be a process with recognizable phases called scripts. And they're nearly unconscious activities that we partake in on a regular basis. And we repeat the behaviors every time we encounter that event. So that might be, for example, waking up every day at the same time, getting dressed in the same order, having a similar breakfast. These routines help us sort of get through the day without having to make a brand new choice every time we encounter that script. Dysfunctional cycles are scripted around negative events and involve undesired repetitive patterns, or URPs. A person may feel trapped in a set of circumstances, and those involved in URPs can have knee-jerk reactions when they encounter conflict. And it's important to note that issues in these behaviors are not resolved in dysfunctional cycles. And there are 3 dysfunctional conflict cycles that are common, those being avoidance accommodation cycle, competitive conflict escalation cycle, and passive aggressive cycle. Characteristics of people who engage in these patterns avoid conflict or tend to give in or accommodate very quickly. And they use behaviors such as withdrawing, leaving the scene, avoiding the discussion, or choosing just to be silent. When we avoid, we are putting effort into not engaging the other. And examples of avoidance would be like statements, I don't want to offend anybody, or would it be a good idea for me to speak up? Maybe we're unsure about speaking up. Maybe we just don't dare say anything. Or wanting to create unpleasantness for yourself or others. Some avoid conflict because they feel anxiety in interpersonal, group, or public communication situations. Either the conflict isn't resolved, which hurts the relationship, or issues build up, which is gunny sacking, resulting in mismanaged conflict. And when we engage in gunny sacking behavior, we are storing up pain and anger, which eventually causes us to explode. And the conflict gets out of hand or not handled at all, which is avoidance accommodation, and can serve as a useful tool so long as it eliminates the arguing and does no damage to the relationship. But it can allow a participant in conflict to address difficult topics at a more appropriate time. Competitive conflict communication is a cycle fueled by previous unresolved grievances that affect current conflict. Conflict begins with competitive messages by the initiator, I'm right and you're wrong, for example. The cycle is intensified when the other feels that they are in a win-lose orientation situation. And the outcome is generally that one person wins and the other loses. And the person that has lost feels that it's an unresolved grievance and it affects future conflicts for them. There's the passive-aggressive communication cycle. And this cycle begins with the belief that the conflict is bad and avoided if at all possible, and when possible. Because we would like to avoid conflict, experiencing one makes us really nervous or uncomfortable. Something that makes us nervous is something that we probably put off as long as possible. And rather than confront the person, one goes over the person's head or behind their back, addressing it sort of not in an upfront way. And if the person gets his or her way, one's behavior is confirmed and the cycle starts again. So those were dysfunctional conflict cycles. Now I'm going to go into functional conflict cycles. And what are those? Let's see. Conflict that we encounter or engage in a in a functional way consists of compromising and taking the middle of the road approach in conflict communication. And nobody totally wins or loses because the conflicting parties settle for a workable solution rather than finding a total mutually satisfying solution. There are times when compromising can have a positive effect in a conflict situation, especially if both parties cannot have everything they want. That might be an option. Compromising can also have a negative effect, however, on outcomes if all parties exchange offers and make concessions and walk away from the conflict feeling dissatisfied with the outcome. An example of this could be like siblings inheriting maybe property or house from a relative or their parents, and the siblings might believe that they did more to help their parents than other siblings might have in their later years and should receive a little bit more than maybe some of the other siblings are receiving. A compromising strategy is trade-offs involving give and take, and what it does is it seeks to find acceptable but not necessarily preferred solutions for everyone involved, because neither party may win everything using it, but at least each party gets some of what they want. So that's achievable. The second is collaborating conflict communication, and this is the preferred strategy. Collaboration means using integrative behaviors and developing mutually satisfying agreements to solve the problem once and for all. It has two essential components. The first is that it consists of integrative behaviors such as cooperation, collective action, mutual assistance. And the second is that partners have the same goal in mind, which is to strive for a mutually satisfying solution to the conflict. Collaboration not only emphasizes one's own interests, but it also respects the interest of others' interests, needs, and goals. Because you're sharing information about what everybody needs to achieve their goals and acknowledge their interests. So it is often that conflicting parties compromise too early when a little more effort would produce a solution that completely satisfies both of them. Low personal relationship stress. This is stress that comes from the demands and pressures of the recent past and anticipated demands and pressures of the near future. You can have either personal or relationship stress or a combination of both of those. When we don't consider ourselves or our interests or our needs, avoidance and accommodation create low feelings of self-worth and relationship satisfaction with no opportunities for personal or relationship growth. So not really optimal. Relationship stress becomes synonymous with relationship dissatisfaction and deterioration, which result in social disengagement, such as a breakup, divorce, or losing your job, or maybe even avoiding the person altogether. When we use collaboration to manage conflicts, we reduce emotional and physical stress as well as stress on the relationship. And some of these aspects would include personal stress would be like goes on with an individual. Low personal stress occurs within a person and refers to wear and tear on one emotionally and physically. Stress such as strong feelings, anxiety, frustration, or anger that are associated with life. Things that come up like death of a family member, divorce, marriage, or a new job. Or maybe we're just moving. Those can cause personal stress. They also have physical attributions or consequences, which is they can cause ulcers, heart disease, hypertension, migraines, and even ultimately suicide. Stress, a little bit of stress can help us in our performance, but too much of it, as I just mentioned, is too much. Relationship stress would be something that occurs outside of the individual and refers to wear and tear on a relationship, and it goes on between two or more persons. Then we have high personal and relationship growth and satisfaction. When we only consider our own self-interest and at the expense of others, competition creates conditions described as high personal growth. Feelings of self-worth, relationship, satisfaction for one who dominates the relationship, but it comes at the cost of another who experiences the low personal growth. So when we combine self-interest with listening and integrative approach in problem solving, collaboration is the only strategy that will promote high feelings of self-worth and relationship satisfaction with others, with our partners, and offers maximum personal and relationship growth. Now, how do we enact collaboration? Collaboration strategy for managing conflicts requires that a person believe that the concerns of the other person are just as important as their own, and they adapt to with goals that find mutually satisfying solutions for both parties in conflict resolution. Collaboration is necessary when we're trying to achieve genuine and mutual understanding of another. When we enact collaboration, we might be participating in clarifying the other's points of view so that they're understood. They might strive for a mutual understanding by increasing their range of perspective, solutions, and alternatives. It's sort of thinking in the other person's shoes or putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And when you do that, you're able to implement a mutual understanding by undertaking the solution as both parties agree upon. So it's a win-win. And there's advantages to collaboration. While finding a mutual understanding is important, it is wasted time if we do not implement the key aspects of collaboration. It usually takes a period of time, so that minor adjustments and maybe alter a plan a little bit so that the outcomes work out as intended. As we go through conflict, you might find that you've found the answers, but as you're moving through the process, find that those answers didn't necessarily work for you. So looking for the aspects of collaboration are important as well. And those aspects are being less competitive, mutual learning and fact-finding, exploring differences in the other's values, focusing on interest rather than positions, which I think that is very important. It gives you more leeway when you're focusing on more interests that offer more options as opposed to being in a position. It allocates responsibility for implementation across many parties. So that means we all get to be responsible when we're collaborating, which is very important that we all feel a part of the process. The conclusion by the participants is generated through interactive process, which is being a part of the resolution in conflict. Often it's an ongoing process. Sometimes you sit down, you have a plan, and you come back to troubleshoot things that weren't necessarily working that you thought might have. And this helps us to build, gives us the potential to build individual and community during conflict management. And you see leadership and decision-making and communication as part of the process in the functional cycle. So, communication considerations, choosing appropriate options. What you want to think about when you are doing this is when you're trying to implement functional conflict cycles options, you want to think about the occasion. You know, people play out particular roles given in certain contexts with familiar settings at particular times. So occasion matters. The other person obviously matters. We want others to, we don't want to treat others differently because of who they are, or maybe considering their needs is the third option here. And you are an element in every conflict and should consider your own needs and how you prioritize them, which is important because you want to feel as important as you're making the other person feel. So you're part of the collaborative conflict communication. Let's see, so when we are engaging in collaborative conflict communication, the aspects of functional conflict cycles, we want to be flexible, open to alternatives, and adaptable. but also include collaborative conflict strategy, which promotes cooperative, integrative, and assertive behavior. And things that we might want to consider are if something is really important to us or really important to the other. If you are going to hate yourself later for not sharing your feelings, ideas, or options on a particular conflict or in a particular conflict. When a long-term relationship between you and the other person is important, when the other person can handle your assertiveness without responding, that's really important, is to understand who you're dealing with, so you don't get that knee-jerk reaction with maybe some aggressive or passive-aggressive behavior. When the other person is cooperative, picking up on those signals is important when you're dealing with another in conflict. Collaborative conflict communication. And when a win-win solution is a impossible problem, or part of a solution to a problem is possible. Excuse me. Avoiding accommodating conflict communication, when you aren't sure of your facts or confident of your idea, when the emotional hurt offsets any benefits that might result, when something has occurred that is more important to others than it is to you, or when a long-term relationship between you and the other is important. Competing conflict communication. That is when you have exhausted all other options and you are in a physically threatening situation in which you must defend yourself or avoid being injured, even if you use the minimum, or even then you want to use the minimum amount of force necessary to overcome a threat and let, authorities take over and handle the matter. The second would be when a physically threatening situation exists for others and you choose to intervene on their behalf. So not the best position to be in, but options, as you're going through those. Passive-aggressive conflict communication is when you are in a physically threatening situation. You may have to go behind the other person's back secretly to report them in order to avoid, being injured or involved in a physically harmful altercation. And avoid the confrontation where you might be seriously harmed. Let's see. So in conclusion, I have discussed choices we make in conflict situations which offer differing results. How we view our relationships, past successes, failures, how we identify an issue, assign blame, and how we voice our complaints affects our pattern of conflict communication. When we choose avoidance, accommodation, competitive, or passive-aggressive conflict cycles, we tend to get caught up in destructive cycles that don't allow conflicts to get resolved or offer a satisfactory outcome, and does not offer an option for the relationship to grow. When we view conflict as a normal part of our relationships and take into account ours and others' needs and choose functional cycles, however, such as compromising and collaborating, we are less likely to succumb to destructive conflict cycles. So, those were options in our functional and dysfunctional conflict cycles, and I want to thank you for listening in, and I hope you learned something. and we'll see you soon.